Yo,
Episode 20,
2-0, back in action.
not 19,
Not 19,
not 18.
not 17. Episode 20, coming off of a good weekend. We do our programming on Mondays, so we figured we'd come up with a topic pertaining to programming. All right, so what we're dropping today is the topic of discussion is accessory movements.
Accessorizing your accessories. What we understand really, if we can take a look at how we do movement, we either train for compound, complex movements or everything else. And that everything else for us, we like to define as accessory. Things that can help complement these big movements, these big exercises, and not being afraid to do them.
Yeah, no, accessory, the term is basically anything pertaining to a non-compound movement. It's safe to say we both agree on majority of your training should be these compound movements, but in order to really succeed and excel in lifting these compound movements, you want to kind of nitpick these smaller things, kind of throw in the smaller idea of accessory movements.
Yeah, you're going to get the most bang for your buck doing these compound movements, and in our programming, that's why it's so popular. They actually can feel that it's the most bang for their buck, but we want to take the approach that you're only as strong as your weakest link, and those weakest links for a lot of people aren't the compound movements. It's these small little muscle groups, these isolation exercises that they don't train enough to help build their bigger movement.
Yeah, and we can come out with some examples to kind of give the listener more of an idea on what we're talking about. So what you just mentioned was you're only as strong as your weakest link. So the best way to kind of identify when to program accessory movements is based on what your weaknesses are. A good example would be if you are doing a bench press, right? And you come down, touch your chest, you're pressing, you get about halfway up and closer to that 3/4 way up, and you can't lock out, right? So that would be a prime example to kind of throw in some accessory movements, maybe focusing on triceps, okay, something like that, where you got 3/4 of the way up, but you didn't get that full lockout, something to accessorize on developing tricep strength. So that'd be a good example for that.
Yeah, and we can play that game all over a compound movement like the deadlift, and they struggle through that first pull, right? Then maybe they need to do some other movements to help complement the strength of that. Maybe it's isolation banded hamstrings, maybe it's single leg RDLs, maybe there's some other stuff they can do to help complement that overall pulling motion. We do this, again, this is not just for weightlifting. A good example would be the handstand push-up. It's a very common exercise that we do in our program, and it's also a very commonly challenged exercise by most people. It's a struggle for them to move high rep upside down at full range of motion. So we recognize their issue is not the handstand, it's maybe some of the movements that are accessorizing that. So weaker shoulders, so they can just work more seated press work. Maybe it's tricep and they don't get that lockout strong. They can work through some tricep extensions over time to help build that out. But I think it's clear that what the compound movements allows us to do is to see where some of their weaknesses are, go back to the drawing board with accessory movement, and then build them back up.
Yeah, in regards to programming, the first step is identifying weaknesses. Then the second step would be, when do we kind of throw these accessory movements in, within our training? You can go before, after, kind of dependent on your, training structure. But you definitely don't want to take the focus away from practicing this main lift and just focusing on just the accessory movement. But in regards to throwing them alongside, you can go pre, you can go post. It's kind of up to you, and obviously it depends on what type of movement, things like that.
Yeah, I think people could stick to the group class 3 to 4 days a week, and they should be adding those accessory 2 to 3 days a week. That could be pre-workout, post-workout. I think it's whatever works with someone's lifestyle, right? If they have to come in early morning and do that accessory work pre-workout, do it. If they have to do it post-workout, do it. If they have to do it on a separate day itself, do it. The issue of why they're not getting better is not whether they're doing it pre or post, it's that they're not doing it at all.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of, we had a topic of discussion one time, was like, is it better to stretch before your workout or after your workout? And you can find a million different point of views, but we both agreed on, it doesn't matter when you do it as long as you do it.
Right.
And that could be the same thing pertaining to accessory stuff. You got to get the work in. Don't make up an excuse, I heard it's better to do it before, but I didn't do it before, so I'm not even going to do it after. I'm just not going to do it. The important part is you doing it.
Right. The other thing that we look for is when we start strategizing sets and reps is that traditionally the accessory work is done with a higher volume, less load. So there's an inverse relationship between the two. We're not trying to put a circuit between all these smaller ISO exercises and create a workout out of that. That's not what we're trying to do. We want to take long rest periods. We want to keep the heart rate low. We're really looking to really complement single action motion to help build on those full compound motion.
Yeah, it's narrowing down that little segment with that common goal to get that specific thing better. You're not going to come in here and, for an accessory day, so to speak, and, leave out of there like you just did a Fran or something like that, super, super gassed and winded. It's understanding what your specific purpose is, okay, dialing in on that and just accomplishing that.
So let's give a rundown on that with numbers. So the compound lift of the day is a strict press, 5x5. Where do we build accessory work for that motion? We want to keep it upper body. Today's an upper body push day. How do we accessorize that with the 5x5 standing seated press?
Well, I would say majority of that time in the gym is going to be on that 5x5 because that's the primary focus. Okay, and then with the remainder of the time, depending on how much time you got, you can kind of throw in maybe a seated dumbbell press, okay, or maybe some skull crushers at the end of the workout, something to develop tricep strength. But if your focus is to come up with an accessory movement pertaining to the strict press, you're not going to go ahead and do, bent over rows or pull-ups. You're going to stay, hey, the focus is pushing strength, right? You do that 5x5 on the strict press, so the accessory movements is going to be something to develop that pushing strength, whether it's something more isolated as like a skull crusher. What's
always been helpful for me is never to, and this is why I try not to geek out on talking the proper semantics on muscle groups, but on muscle action. So if the action is press, what other isolation movements can I do that help complement the press? And that's how I think about movement. I don't think about all the fancy terms that cause the press to do the press, because I can see what movements help complement the press, and I look at other movements that have pressing like motions that are single action, that are iso work, and that really helps me think about how I build up that stronger overall compound movement like the press.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You're kind of focusing on what the movement is, not necessarily the muscle groups that are working it. That's probably that old bodybuilder in me that thought of it like that.
Well, and our benefit, and I say it's a huge advantage, is that we come out of the commercial gym, so we came out of ISO work. Mm-hmm. We came out of the bodybuilding separation. And I think for what I've seen in my experience, some of the best trainers in our field are the ones that come out of the commercial gym and then moved in, because they got the best of both worlds and they find a happy medium. It's why functional bodybuilding, why he's doing so successful. Yeah. It's why a company like OPEX is very successful. These individuals have the experience as personal training, and they brought it into this functional training industry, and they've done really well for themselves.
Yeah, and another to your point is, you have that perfect balance of intensity too. Accessory movement's not going to be too intense, So people like me and you that came from that, the corporate gym setting, we still do our accessory movement days, our bodybuilding days, so to speak, and then we come in here, we'll do the CrossFit workouts that's super, super intense. If you're doing CrossFit style training 7 days a week, you're going to get crushed, you're going to get beat up. So, it's safe to say that, we're getting the best of both worlds in regards to intensity. We're not, overtraining, we're not beating ourselves up. But it's kind of just going back to the term, we're working smarter, not harder all the time.
Yeah, and there are certain movements that are compound in nature that are just crushing people right now. I think kipping pull-ups are crushing people. They're messing with their joints. and they can't figure it out. And to us, it's obvious why their elbows are flaring. People are jerking and their shoulders are in pain and they don't know why. And so we have to help them take a step back, because a lot of these people, this is their first form of formal training, and so they just don't see it. And for us, it's so glaringly obvious why these aches and pains are occurring, but we have to get them to slow down a little bit to really help them recognize what's going on. And unfortunately, the moment the Achilles heel here is that they actually learn this when they finally get injured, because it's like, wow, I get it. I was forced to actually slow down, and now I can work some of this accessory work, and then when I come back into training, I feel better.
Yeah, and then when you're doing the accessory work, there's no pressure to, get a great time. So that's when the focus is on that much more quality movement, as opposed to just getting the greatest time ever. There's no clock, there's no rush, so you can kind of say, hey, you know what, this feels really good. This is how my overhead strict press should feel. Isolation movements isn't the only type of accessory movements that are out there. You can kind of pick a certain compound movement and then determine if you have a weakness on one specific part of that movement. Like when I talked about earlier in the podcast was your bench press, the lockout portion. That is something you could work on specifically by just practicing the lockout portion, okay? Not necessarily just doing an isolation movement, but you can still get down on a bench. A good one is, pin presses. You can kind of set up the bench to where there's some pins in line with the bench, where you're really just starting the barbell from about 3/4 of the way up, and you're just pressing from the pins to the lockout. It can be done with multiple movements, and this kind of goes back to a part where you're kind of identifying your weaknesses. This is pertaining on what part of the compound lift that is weak.
Yeah, back squats would be pause squats at the bottom, sit on a green box with a kettlebell goblet squat. So there's still some similarity to compound movement, but you're taking focus on one part of the motion, right? It's the bottom, it's the top. Usually people struggle at the bottom or the top, so we're looking at where that is and trying to complement with some less compound exercises to do the work.
Yeah, and you can pick top, bottom, or even during. Something I see that's pretty common is a lot of the Olympic lifters do stuff from blocks or do stuff from
that mid motion.
It's
I
that
like
mid,
that.
That's that transition.
Yeah,
it's that transition. And then something we haven't really mentioned yet, but a lot of this stuff can be fun. It can give you that extra spice to your training. On, hey, I'm not just gonna go into the gym and do a 5x5. I'm gonna do some snatches from blocks, or I'm gonna attach some bands to my bench.
This week it's pulling, and today we're doing curls. What other gym are you going to see that in the middle of a CrossFit gym? We're curling because it adds spice, it's different, and it's completely iso. We know that if someone's bicep strength is not where it needs to be, there is no miracle that they are going to perform to get themselves over the bar. We know that they have to have an equal level of strength to body weight ratio, and the bicep is a major component of that in the pull-up. So why not acknowledge that and get people to bicep curl?
Yeah, no doubt. And then it just comes down to the quality coaching of knowing when to program something like that. We program bicep curls today because we have our focus of the week, our skill of the week being pulling strength. So we know damn well, like you just mentioned, the stronger the biceps are, it's going to pertain to your pulling strength.
It's really interesting because I think a lot of gyms aren't doing it because they're not confident enough to give that to their members, because they've sold high intensity for so long that they can't put something on the front end like bicep curls and not have the confidence to sell that as a part of the training component, because it's not high heart rate, it's not putting them on their ass. And unfortunately, long term, it's a bad practice, because these are the people that are getting injured sooner.
Yeah, it kind of just comes down to the coaches. We do a great job at explaining, hey, the bicep curls, this is how it's going to feel. It's not going to feel super gassed up on after doing a big metcon, but hey, this is the value here. It's going to pertain to when we get up on the bar. You're going to be doing better pull-ups, and it's up to the coach to go forward with confidence on explaining that to the members.
Yep. What's another accessory work they can do? Let's just kind of spitball on the pull-up. What other accessory work first that comes to mind? For me, if it's not bicep, it's lat. So we've done a single arm dumbbell bent over rows on the bench. Like, let's do it. Let's put that as part of a skill because we know and recognize the lats are just as important as the biceps for pull-ups. So let's put them in. That's a great accessory work.
Yeah. L-sit hold from the top. You know.
So you're getting some isometric in there?
Yeah, isometric, exactly. Isometric. So what else we got? Any horizontal pulling, like you just mentioned, the ring rows, ring curls.
Great.
If you're really, geeking out about it, you got to get just as much vertical pulling as you are horizontal pulling. And we're talking about other gyms. It's probably safe to say a lot of other gyms don't focus on horizontal pulling as much as we do. They just focus on the pull-up, which is vertical pulling.
Well, what's even more scarier is that the only back training they're getting right now is pull-ups.
Yeah, it's vertical.
Which is crazy because we got 80% legs and your only upper body pulling exercise is pull-ups. And there's a huge skew, disproportionate ratio between how they're training their upper body. And when you say it like that and you're stepping outside the box, you're like, no wonder people's shoulders are jacked. No wonder their elbows are blowing up like blowing up. I had a member like that earlier this week. He's been doing all these pull-ups and now his elbow hurts. Like, you got to get off the kipping for a little bit, calm it down with some strict, and then let's build this thing back up. So
yeah, that's a good point. Is we got to kind of go back to the strict before kip, slogan that's been there for a while. If you don't have the strength or the control to put yourself up safely in a strict pull-up, like in my opinion, you shouldn't be doing kipping pull-ups. Even if you can't get a kipping pull-up, but you can't get a strict pull-up, I'd rather you see, throw in a band for a little bit of, assistance and knock out some strict, get a little bit stronger, then learn the kip.
I agree, and I think that's one of those movements where you have to, unfortunately, have some issues with when it comes to inflammation or joint or some type of injury to be like, hey, maybe I have to reassess what I'm doing with these pull-ups.
Yeah. Let me go. So we got a pulling one. Let's go legs. All right. So say I want some accessory movements for my back squat.
Sure. I mean, one of my favorites lately has been some RDLs, some heavy, crazy RDLs. 85 pounds on each hand, strap them up, go slow, 4x8, get some control on it. Nothing leaves me more sore in my hamstrings than the heavy DB RDL.
Yeah, I love it. When we were kind of game planning for the podcast, a part of my favorite accessory moves were back extensions. Back extensions. It's kind of, it flows on the same thing, strengthening your posterior chain, your backside, which is your glutes, hamstrings, lower back. If you, any deadlifting or back squatting, when in doubt, try to strengthen that posterior chain.
Yep, I agree. I think a favorite of ours is high rep lunges. I mean, they don't have to roll 400, 800 like we do, but I mean, doing sets of 20 will blow up their legs like they've never experienced before because they do it with more pace. They do it without the this pressure to perform really fast and then really get that mind-body connection we talk about. They really get a much positive benefit from doing leg work like that than when they do doing 20 reps slow and doing 20 reps fast are two completely different forms of the lunge. And I think they just need to do a little bit more tempo work on their accessory to really get the most bang for their buck.
Yeah, we didn't even mention the tempo work. It's a great addition to accessory movements is some tempo work. Slow it down. And the beauty about doing a rep slow is you feel these different positions during the rep that you won't normally feel at higher intensity.
Yep.
So we got pulling, we got legs. Let's finish out with some pushing, man. What are some of your go-tos to kind of increase some pushing strength?
I know a big weakness of mine is my triceps because every single time I do tricep extensions, skull crushers, anything like that, I get crushed. I'm sore for days. So I know it's one of those things that that there's still a gap for me between my compound pushing. I benched over 300 pounds, and I go 3x12 tricep extensions, and my triceps are sore for days. It's a great indicator for me that my triceps aren't built up yet. So I'm a big fan of tricep extensions.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like banded pushdowns, you know, and I've seen you do it too with some personal training clients where we do the ghetto tricep pushdown where we set up 2 red bands, and then we'll put a PVC pipe in between them.
It works.
It does. It really does. It transfers.
And it goes back to what we said is like, because of our experience in the commercial gym, we're trying to get creative on what we know, the ISO work that worked for us back then, and how we can translate that and bring that into our gym here. And that's probably what's made me such a great coach, is I found that for me, I found that happy medium. Because at one point in my life, I was commercial gym, don't touch CrossFit with a 10-foot pole. That was my mentality.
As was I.
And then I came through and I said, I'm only going to do CrossFit because it's the only thing I believe in. Mm-hmm. And then over time, I found this happy medium between the two.
Yeah, you're like combining, you know, the value in both areas, and then also, you know, based on your beliefs on how training should be, you know, and your little own personal twist. And it all flows together very well, man. I think that's why we got such a great thing going at Naples Strength and Conditioning.
Thanks, brother. So let's leave it out for current members or people doing our style of training. What would be recommendations for them trying to, hey, we sold the idea on accessory work. They're like, hey, maybe I should put that into my training. How do they do that when they're already getting 3 to 4 days a week of high intensity training?
Well, first things first, I'd go on the programming that we send out every Sunday.
Really good.
Okay. And then, you know, determine on what days you're coming in and then what movements are those specific days. Okay. So if you see something that you know you're going to be doing that day, and it, you know, might not be a strength for you, you can come in beforehand, do a little work before, do a little bit of work after. You know, it just comes down to you getting it in. And then another one you can do is maybe a off day. If you feel like super beat up from a, you know, very intense, you know, Metcon or some really heavy compound lifts, you know, do it on an off day. It could be somewhat of an active rest day where the focus is just doing some accessory movements.
That's really good. I think the most underutilized time of training right now is before class or after class for people. They're already here. The facility is already set up for them to do their work, but they have no goals. And so what happens is they find themselves doing 100 PVC pass-throughs before class, sitting on a foam roller but not really doing anything with it. And it's just such a great opportunity to take 10 to 15 minutes on, even if it's one accessory work a day that you come in, it's an exponential improvement from what they're doing with a PVC or a foam roller.
Yeah, it's kind of just having some urgency to follow maybe a game plan. If they would develop a game plan, hey, you know, so, you know, it's pulling strength week. If we didn't have biceps today, say today was a strict pull-up, you know, if you want to do some bicep curls before or after, you know, even like you just said, one movement compounded over time, like the consistency there will deliver the long-term benefit.
Of course, and I think that if we can just sell that a little bit better, we won't have to explain the obvious to them, which is like, you're not getting good at your pull-ups because you're doing absolutely nothing to improve your pull-ups, and our programming is not a miracle. There's nobody's programming that's going to perform a miracle if you aren't spending extra time outside of the programming 3 to 4 days a week to work on your weaknesses.
Yeah, sometimes it just takes that, you know, almost punch in the face where you bomb out, you know, you can't do a freaking pull-up during the group class to say, hey, you should be doing some more work for this. Or unfortunately, if there's an injury or something, your shoulder gets blown out, it's like, hey, you know what, we kind of should have established this, you know, way before this happened. Unfortunately, it takes like that, you know, awakening to really kind of go back to the drawing board and do more of what you're doing now, because it's obviously not enough.
Yeah, nothing makes me feel better than someone's frustration on the double under, for them to come back next week to say, I bought my own rope to actually get to take this seriously. And that's powerful to me, because now they're finally meeting us halfway. They're not hoping that we're doing all this work for them.
Yeah, no doubt. Cool.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Accessorize your accessory movement. Take some time. Think about what is your weakest link. Put some time and energy into that, and you're going to see some great results.
No doubt.
Appreciate it, guys.
Peace.